So this is going to be a small talk again on drug repurposing and our program to accelerate treatments for Syngap-related disorder. So one question just with families, I know we're talking about drugs and kids, and that is always a hard topic. So one question is, why are we doing this? And I just want to reiterate that Syngap-related disorder is really hard. You may have seen the slide yesterday, this figure yesterday from Gillian McKee, just to show that in compared with other syndromes like Rett's or Angelman's shown in the blue shades here, Syngap-related disorder shown in red has higher rates of behavioral abnormalities and autistic behaviors. If you're wondering if this is hard, it is really hard. Syngap kids are really challenging. I'm dealing with a sick one right now, and it's a lot. And typical medications don't always work. This is another figure from Gillian McKee's figure showing anti-seizure medications and behavior modifying medications. It is a little bit all over. There's a little bit of everything that's kind of being used. There's not one specific medication that's really being most effective for our kids. And if you've gone into any of these behavior modifying medications, sleep medications, my doctors are always saying, let's try this. We'll see if this works. And there's nothing that's a guaranteed to improve our conditions. So why are we collecting data? Why are we doing observational studies that we'll talk about? Because scientists need data to understand our lives. If we look at these two figures here, the ones I showed before about the behaviors and the autistic features, we know that. We know that it's difficult to get the right medications, which these figures show, but our scientists and our physicians don't necessarily understand that until they see figures like this that really capture that as data and express it as data. So that's important for us to relay that data back to the people that are supporting us and clinicians and scientists. So, and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, the traditional drug development timeline. It's very long and it's very expensive, and we're not going to get a small molecule through this pipeline because we are such a small disorder. So this is a process that we want to leverage that's gone through for other drugs. Just to highlight here, this is our current therapeutic pipeline. Most of our gene modifying treatments are in a preclinical phase. That means they have to go through clinical research and FDA approval before they'll be marketed. So the drugs that are going to be, or the treatments that are going to be more near term, are going to be those small molecules, are going to be more repurposed molecules. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about that today. So once we have a manufactured and marketed product for one indication, we can take that drug and write for off-label prescriptions. So an off-label prescription for an FDA-approved drug could be something that we could easily access. So if your physician writes an off-label prescription for a specific drug, your insurance may cover it and you could be approved. And these are the criteria for that: evidence of treatment efficacy, reasonable treatment cost, and no other treatment options. Right now, we have no other treatment options. We have treatments that we use, treatments that are used for psychiatric disorders or anxiety, those types of things, but they're not specific to Syngap-related disorder. So I checked the box on no other specific treatments. So we need to be able to have evidence of treatment efficacy, because a lot of the treatments that we're looking at are not at reasonable costs. We heard Amber's talk yesterday about Ravicti. It's $800,000 a year. That is not a reasonable cost for a treatment within our community. So if we are able to check the boxes of these different categories here for insurance coverage, we would have a novel treatment for Syngap-related disorder. If we're not able to show efficacy or have a reasonable cost, we may have to go back and do more clinical research. Another approach for this would be to push for prescriptions and advocate for access. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. So in order to get this evidence of treatment efficacy, what do we need? We need FDA-approved drug hits from our drug screens. We need evidence of preclinical efficacy, and we need evidence of clinical efficacy. So this brings us to the FAST model of drug repurposing, which I talked a little bit about yesterday, and I'm going to talk a little bit differently about it today. So this is our FAST approach for drug repurposing, where we find drugs that have a safety profile that is reasonable, that have been identified in high throughput screens to be effective against some of our preclinical models. We're going to assess those drugs within other preclinical models and in vitro within human iPSC lines. We're going to evaluate what that looks like for families that want to try these different drugs to do drug repurposing with that off-label prescription. And if we need to, then we will trial those drugs through a small decentralized clinical trial. And that's what Chris Lee Messer was talking about yesterday. So these are the different individuals or groups of individuals that we are going to be filtering this information through in order to help us understand what we need to do to move to the next step. So once we have drugs, a hit list, we're going to be talking to our scientists and advisors to make sure that those are reasonable drugs to move forward and would be reasonable for treatment for our condition. Once we have some preclinical data, we want to talk with our families and their individual physicians to determine if these are drugs that people are interested in taking. And once we have observational data, then we want to talk to physicians and families to determine, and industry and FDA to determine if this is worth a clinical trial. So within this process, it's a building network of information. We'll be collecting information on these drugs of interest, expanding this for off-label use, and potentially expanding this for on-label use, where Syngap-related disorder would be on the label for a specific drug. These are the different mechanisms of the different discovery platforms that we've used, and these were all discussed yesterday. And I'm not going to go into this in any detail. If you're interested in this, please review these slides from the presentations that were yesterday. We will have these on the web. All four of these different drug candidate discovery platforms were presented on yesterday. So just to say here that SRF has funded research for 3 different drug screens looking at the phenotype rescue, Syngap upregulation, and transcriptome restoration. These 3 different approaches can provide 3 different type of drug outcomes. They're not redundant in any way, but they're complementary in the fact that we can expand the drug repertoire in which we're able to understand and access for our kids in this way. So that is why we've looked at multiple different approaches in order to do this. So I want to talk a little bit more today about the survey approach. So what we want to do is collect information from our community in an observational way. And this means we want to research and observe, collect data on what our real world experience is with using these off-label drugs that are prescribed by your physician to treat the symptoms of our kids with Syngap-related disorder. So these studies look to evaluate potential associations with drug outcomes, looking at adverse events if we see anything that might not be favorable, and to look at contraindications with other potential drugs. So the key features of an observational study is it's non-interventional. This means you go to your physician, you're looking at a specific drug or get an over-the-counter drug, supplement in some cases, and you decide that you want to try that. We're not prescribing anything. We just want to monitor your experience. We want you to report on that so we can help inform families. So the purpose, again, is to evaluate safety, tolerability, and any efficacy signals so that we can inform our community, inform in future clinical trials if that is something that we want to move forward with. So the data sources for this would be caregiver-reported outcomes. So we've, in previous work, we've monitored seizures, sleep, behaviors, communication, physical abilities, and quality of life. We're doing this right now, we're setting this up to be in partnership with the Matrix platform and in partnership with Combined Brain. So we had done some of this work with Tanganil, and that was not through an IRB approved protocol because Tanganil was not marketed in the United States and it wasn't FDA approved. For all FDA approved molecules, we will be using a collaboration with Combined Brain through the Matrix platform in order to do observational studies. So if you are pursuing an off-label prescription for an investigational drug or a repurposed drug, we would love to be able to understand your experience through these observational studies. So just very quickly, difference between a survey and a trial. An observational study is meant to gather data on trends without really interfering, where a clinical trial is going to prescribe you that medication under very controlled conditions. For observational studies, there's no control arm, no blinding or randomization, and there's very minimal regulatory oversight, which is the complete opposite of what's going on in a clinical trial, which is extremely regulated. This identifies associations, risk factors, and trends, where a clinical trial, if we go further, will establish the causality and the efficacy of treatment, which is needed for FDA to be able to expand the label to cover Syngap-related disorder. The primary difference for this is if you look at the cost of a clinical trial, it can be very, very expensive, whereas the cost of our observational studies are almost zero. So it's our community providing their experience, and mostly me right now, evaluating that experience. Both of us are working for free. So we can come together to create a very meaningful data set to inform how to move forward into a clinical trial, to make sure that the drugs that we're moving into a clinical trial and paying for these very high costs are going to be successful. So this is just the purpose pipeline, and I talked about this a little bit yesterday. For these different stages, now we're looking at Ravicti, now, or Aqneursa, and nortriptyline. Right now, Ravicti is approved for a urea cycle disorder, and N-acetyl L-leucine was more recent, as Aqneursa was more recently approved for Niemann-Pick disorder. So I'm going to briefly go through these different drugs. So for Ravicti, which is for phenylbutyrate, 4-PB, what is published? So we know that there was just a recent study that you can have access to. This is the study preprint. It's also in that family guide to the science if you have access to that. But there was 2 NDDs that were evaluated with this, and it was safe and tolerable. Seizures were improved, and seizure reduction was sustained. So if you missed what happens within the Syngap world, please go back and look at the video from Zachary Greenspan and Amber Freed. They both gave talks on Ravicti and their experience with the clinical trial or the drug repurposing. But what we know within Syngap, sorry, I've got a respiratory infection. That's kind of hard to breathe sometimes. Within Syngap, the 4-PB was safe, well tolerated, and seizures were improved. The study is still ongoing. I'm going to touch on Tanganil here. And this is probably something that's more of a hot topic now because there have been some movements on this since this weekend. So responses to Tanganil, what is published? For a lot of neurological disorders, there is a lot of information that's been published, and we have compiled a summary of all that published literature. Here are 2 QR codes if you're interested. Those QR codes are also in that family guide. We know that it's safe and effective, and the treatment has been used for over 12 neurological conditions, and it improves cognition, coordination, mobility, and quality of life for most of the conditions that it's been used in. Since we published these 2 articles on our blog, there's been a small study to show that it could reverse the progression of Parkinson's disease in a prodromal stage. We do have a talk later in the session that will address this specifically, so I'm not going to go into this in any more detail. And Aqneursa was recently approved for Niemann-Pick type C, which now means this drug is available as an FDA-approved product that we can start using for repurposed drugs. That is if we can get access to it, which I'll talk about on our next slide. So what is known, I think I'm going to maybe skip to just cover this first bullet and then skip to the next slide. So what is known, what we have done within our community, and I'm so grateful for so many of you providing your information, is we did an observational study. And this was a non-traditional observational study because Tanganil was not a drug that was approved for use in the United States. So if families were interested in providing us with information, we were happy to take that and determine whether or not we were seeing any improvement in condition or seeing any safety signals. We wanted to be able to share this information within our community, and our scientific advisors have advised us not to share that in trial, or not, it's not a trial at all. It's an observational study within a group of individuals. We did this as a proof of concept to determine if there was if there was a reason for us to continue to pursue Tanganil. And what we observed within that study was the same outcomes, roughly, that other groups were observing: improvements in cognition, coordination, mobility, and quality of life. So what happened? And recently, as of this weekend, Tangadel export to the United States was recently stopped, leaving families without continuing access. So we want to address this. And the SRF, what is SRF doing? We are creating access for insurance support. So SRF is currently preparing a letter of medical necessity. We're taking the information that you provided as a community, preparing that to demonstrate the effect in our condition and other neurological conditions that worked with us. This looks broadly to work across multiple NDDs. For those of you that caught Dr. Chow's talk yesterday, there's a lot of preclinical data that's also very supportive of use of this drug. However, this drug is very expensive. It's $400,000 for a prescription. So this likely means that we will have a denied access, which means we need to appeal it. And then we need to make some noise. So we need to we're currently working on an advocacy approach to determine what that exactly would look like. And luckily, SRF is a very dynamic group and we have an advocacy component. So I will be working with them to figure out the best way for us to raise our voice to say that we need to be heard, that we need access to this drug. We do know that there are several individuals that have already been able to gain off-label access to Aknersa. So there is a path forward and we are putting that together and we will reach out to the community for that. But we need to hear your voices in order to be able to get access to that drug. Once we have access to that drug, we want to continue to observe the experiences of our families. So we want to continue to collect data. That'll be again through the Matrix platform so that we can continue to work to expand that off-label use and provide families and physicians with insights into its clinical effectiveness. And finally, we are working with InterBio to evaluate the best approach, or they're evaluating the best approach in order to do a clinical trial for NDDs because they do know that this is an effective drug for our community as well. I know we are a little bit short on time. I don't know. Let's skip the questions right now, and I want to go right into our family panel. So what I wanted to do with the rest of this session, I know we probably have 25 minutes left, is to have our families talk about their experiences with drug repurposing. I know sometimes there is stigma around giving your children drugs, especially behavior modifying drugs, because sometimes there's a feeling of like, I should be able to handle this. I don't know why it's so hard. Or sometimes there's a burden of seizure medications when sometimes those drugs aren't as effective as you hope they would be. So I want to have an opportunity here directly from our families. So today we've got Zoe. And Zoe, is that your husband on stage?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't. Perfect. Excellent. Thank you for joining. I'm sorry to say I don't know your name. Maybe you guys could you guys introduce yourself? So Zoe, I'm having you talk about Tanganil, and Corey, you are talking about Ravicti, and I've just got some questions here that I'd like you guys to talk about. So why don't you introduce yourselves and maybe just start with an introduction and then what led you to try a novel treatment for your child?
Okay, I can go first. I guess. My name is Zoe Baily, and I am Kaya's mom. Kaya's 4.5. And that's a big question. What led us to try the novel treatment of Tanganil? So our experience, it's not on. Oh, sorry, is that better? Okay. So just to be honest, I think I heard a bunch of like chatter about this medication on Facebook and the different social media platforms, as well as just within the SRF community. And then I remember distinctly watching a video, honestly, of Mike's son, like taking a hike. And he was like, this has been a really powerful experience for us. And then I chatted with him and he told me his experience and it was positive. And then I talked to Catherine, our CSO, and I kind of just wanted to know more about how it impacted the body and what kind of the risk factors involved in trying this. At that time, Kaya wasn't on any medications. She was I guess she was doing relatively well. Things were kind of stable. She was making slow progress, but progress nevertheless. And generally, I think our family doesn't use medications. I don't even barely use Tylenol for headaches. And so it's just, we're definitely lean more on the natural side of interventions, but this is just, introduced a whole other level of need. And so it was a lot of conversations between Earl and I, a lot of conversations within my own soul, if this was the right thing. And so I think ultimately what I did was I looked at the risk factors, and it seemed like it was a really low risk option. It came out of our system quick if it happened to not be a good fit. And it felt like a big risk if I'm not, it was I don't know. So that's the unclear journey of how we started taking it. And then the dosing, I just checked. It was our Facebook group, I remember Minnie, I just had asked, what are people doing? And she suggested, start at low dose. And so we're starting at the lowest dose possible. And so that was that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Corey, do you want to talk about your experience?
Yeah, so I want to first start and piggyback a little bit on what Zoe was saying about everybody's threshold. I feel is going to be, there's a wide spectrum, I think, depending on your child's how affected they are. You may be comfortable doing certain things rather than other things. I'm just like Zoe. I try to avoid medicine if possible. We try to err on the lower doses of things first. But I had heard about phenylbutyrate or Ravicti for a year or two, the possibilities and what it was looking like with the other rare disease group that was trying it. So we were in a kind of a dark place right before we got into the trial where her seizures were out of control. She was dropping pretty consistently, probably at that point, 200 times a day. It was all the time. And they had become more intense where when she was maybe 3 years old, it was just a real faint eye flutter where I didn't even know that was a seizure. I thought it was just an autistic tic or some kind of sensory processing issue. Then that progressed to where she was dropping, and we didn't really even know that was a seizure at the time because her eyes would flutter, her knees would buckle. I didn't associate the two. We thought that was more to do with hypotonia. Once we realized they were seizures, we obviously got put on several different. We first started trying with one anti-seizure medicine. We had pretty quick success with it, but then seizures started to kind of come back, so we had to add in a new one. Well, we had been on two for a while. We were on Depakote and clobazam, and that started to wean. And all of a sudden, in say third, fourth quarter of 2023, the seizures became more intense. She started to kind of convulse and was dropping all the time. School teachers were like, we've got to get some help here because we're scared that she's going to fall and hurt herself. So please, let's get a nurse to her. The opportunity came up for us to get in the drug trial in December at our lowest point when she was just all over the place. And I didn't even have to think about it because I had done some prior research to the trial opportunity. So that's why we joined, because it was really just the only option. And it happened to be safe, effective, and have really good potential for us. And so I felt very comfortable with it. And I feel like if you just kind of stay in tune with the different opportunities, you can learn about them as they go. And that way, if the opportunity does populate for you, you then have a good idea of what it looks like and if you're comfortable doing it. So you don't have to study it everything all the time, but just kind of stay aware, listen to the Mike's podcasts, watch our Facebook post, and kind of keep in tune to what we're happening, because as soon as that comes up, you need to make a decision. Are you going to be the one that's going to try it, or are you going to wait and see if somebody else is going to do it. It's really a personal, very personal path.
Those are all great points. Thank you. Thank you, Corey. Let's talk a little bit about how the conversations went with your physician. I feel like sometimes those are really challenging conversations, and sometimes they can be supportive, sometimes they're not. Tell us a little bit, Zoe and Earl, how your conversations went with your physician and your decision to take Tanganol.
Yeah, and absolutely. And just to do a quick intro on myself, my name's Earl Baily. I'm Kai's father, Zoe's husband. Just the discussions, there were no discussions with our physician. We made the ultimate decision based on, again, the research within our community and just, again, looking at the low risk, high reward factor of it. We were at a point in our journey that we were looking for some kind of action instead of just waiting on answers and waiting for things to happen. So just leading into the community in terms of understanding what the dosage would be and just starting with something, right? And then just going from there. So maybe they would have been supportive, I don't know. But I think at the point that we are now, we would probably share the information with our physician at this point to say, hey, like we're doing this drug and it's working for everyone or it's working for her. How do we kind of make sure that we can track this or track the progress, because we're seeing significant progress within her goals educationally and just in her life.
We did reach out
Great.
to, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to transition over to you. Grateful, go for it.
We did reach out to our neurologist. We go to Duke in Durham, North Carolina. And it just so happened that my neurologist was actually friends with Dr. Greenspan. So he was like, yeah, I'll give Zach a call and see what he says. I think it sounds like a good idea, because he was kind of at his end on what to try. He had a trial that was coming up that he was debating on asking us to join as well. But when he heard what he had going on with Dr. Greenspan, he was all on board and made a phone call. We actually were able to have the first EEG we did was 48 hours. And Dr. Greenspan was actually able to share the EEG with Duke, so we wouldn't have to go and have two in such a short amount of time. So we kind of knocked out two birds with one stone also. And so it was very good process.
Excellent. We have only 10 minutes left, so I think I'm going to forego the questions I have on the slide here and open it up to the audience to ask you guys any questions that they might have about your experiences with, for Zoe and Earl, with Tanganol, which was an observational study that we were doing with within SRF, and for Corey, which was the Ravicti trial. Are there microphones in the audience that we could use?
And I apologize in advance. I might have missed this if my daughter was talking in my ear, but can you tell me, were you on any prior seizure medicine? And if so, did you have to get off that to get on this new medication? Like, how did that work?
Is that for me or is for Zoe?
Right.
So yeah, we were on Depakote and Clobazam. I didn't have to come off of anything to do the Ravicti. We added it in. We have been able to titrate down on the Depakote. We almost got rid of it completely, but we noticed she had some sleep issues, and so we just added a couple pills back in the evening. I don't really know if it helped adding it back in the evening. So we'll probably take that out and try again. You know, we never know. It might have been the moon phase at the time. But we haven't come off Clobazam all the way. We have pretty much left that as it is. We tried to titrate down on that, but when we did, we did see seizures pop up again. I don't know if it's because of we weren't doing it slow enough. We felt like we were, and we did what we were told. And so we'll probably all try it again. We haven't tried yet. But I'm glad we got off Depakote. At least one less is better than three.
And Kaya is not on any seizure medication, so there was nothing that we'd have to stop in terms of like her starting this observational study. So we just felt like it was a great blank slate for her, for us to be able to try something and be able to say real-time data with the tangent. So yeah.
My question is for Corey. In regards to Ravicti, do you know that you'll be able to continue that drug going forward? Do you have a prescription now that the trial's over?
So we were guaranteed the drug through 2025, and apparently we're hoping for a generic to get approved. They told us that even if the generic did not come out on time, that they would get a panel together and advocate to our insurance company, because right now we currently have private insurance. We're just got approved for a waiver. Medicaid, I think it's Medicaid, Medicare, Medicaid. I always get confused. That hasn't kicked in yet. And so they did say they would go and try to advocate for us to be able to continue it. So we're hopeful. Mike?
I want to be a little bit positive. Was it exciting being a part of a trial that might help us find a molecule? I mean, this is for both of you, but I mean, we've emphasized the risk and the caution and the blah, blah, blah. Can you just briefly touch on the upsides? Because I want to make this real for people, because our next speaker is going to be inviting you, if you qualify, to sign up for another drug trial. So like, this is not theoretical, guys. So just, I want to hear about like the if there were upsides, or has it just been a nonstop nail biter?
I mean, obviously it's exciting. I'm thankful that we felt comfortable enough to participate, because I'm sure there's going to be some things that I'm hoping that another family is willing to do that I'm not, because I may be a little scared on something, you know, maybe the first person that takes a CRISPR or so, you know, gene modification. But yeah, I was excited to do it. It's been a great process. Working with the Will Cornell has been great. They're all very nice and thoughtful. Feel comfortable with them. They had really great bedside manner, and Zach's just got a great sense of humor, and he's very personable. And so it's been a wonderful experience.
I would say at the beginning, it was just really nerve-wracking. And I'm like, what am I seeing? And I'm hypervigilant. I'm watching everything, which I'm already doing, but now I'm doing it to another level. And so the beginning phases of it was real feeling. And then when I tell people that we'd started this, it was like, wait, what? You're ordering a medication from France and you don't know, and your dog. Anyway, so that was like, it felt like very anxiety provoking. But as it kind of became part of our routine, as our ritual of giving her, when we gave her the medication, and then when we started seeing really amazing results, I just still feel so endlessly grateful that this was available and we took the risk, because I feel like we have a different child, and we started in June, and you know, it's only a couple of months ago. So it's more than exciting. I mean, it's like, yeah, it's been really life-changing for us, and opened up different possibilities that we didn't think were possible for her.
Yeah, and life-changing for our kids.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
she's not seizing every 5 seconds anymore. Imagine having a lightning storm going off in your brain every 30 seconds, nonstop, all day long. She probably was in a daze. And now she seeks out attention from kids, where before she'd go in her corner and she'd play on her iPad or whatever by herself. She didn't care if there was anybody near her or not. Now she sees kids, and she's not going to go and be like, let's play hide and seek. But she'll run beside them and watch them play. So she's excited to interact in her own way. It's a different way, but she's interacting. She's now going in the kitchen cabinets and being like, oh, what's that in there? And you know, kids, when they're little, they go through that, what's that phase? Well, she's hit that now, and she's pointing to every daggone thing she sees, and she's like, what that do? What's that do? And it's awesome, because she's learning every time she's asking me, and it might be the same daggone thing that she's asked me for 10 times, but she's learning things, and she wasn't doing it before. All of her teachers noticed a difference immediately. I mean, everybody said, this is game changing. So she's not having seizures. That's huge.
And just quickly
But I'm cautiously optimistic. It can happen anytime, you know?
Yeah, just to quickly
No, we're just
piggyback off
gonna
that, like there's been a lot of benefits for Kaya. Some of it has just been simple things, just as like being able to concentrate, being able to transition from one activity to the other, being present in the world. I would say I would just describe Kaya previously as a child that would need a lot of external stimulation from TV and shows. Like she wakes up now and the TV does not have to be the first thing that's on. She's able to lock in and play with certain toys that we have out. So just she seems to be a lot more comfortable in her environment, able to look outside of the window when we're driving in the car to peer and just like gaze and just be comfortable with that. And it's like, it's very rewarding to see your child progress, to be able to like understand the environment, understand like simple things like cartoons, right? It's like, a character falls and she goes, uh-oh, like she can see it now. And she wasn't able to do that 6 months ago. So it's like, it's really refreshing and nice to see our daughter, our real daughter, to see her true self. And so she's shining and it's really nice to see that.
Now, there has been some, like, I wouldn't consider it a negative, but some behavior has come out of it because she's kind of awakened and sees her environment. And when she's wants something now, she's like, oh, I wanted that. Why don't I have that? But it's been minor. It's not been anything we haven't been able to kind of deal with. But there has been some uptick in transitioning at school where she's like, I want to get on the bus. Well, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. It's not bus time. But I'm just glad she's coherent enough to have that want now.
I think we have time for one more question from the audience, and then we're going to have to move to our next talk. Does anybody have one more question?
Piper.
Are you guys losing access to Tanganil? Are you losing access to it? I don't know if that question has already been asked, but okay.
I think that's probably a bigger question. I think we can no longer order it from the same site we did, but we have kind of a stockpile. I don't know. Yeah, like I feel like there's also a network and other people within the community have tried it and it's not been good for them. So people are helping each other for those that it is working for. And then I think the hope is that since it is FDA approved, there'll be a process of being able to get it from our doctor through a prescription.
Eventually.
Cool.
That was a really good question. Thank you very much for participating and for sharing and for your leadership with SRF.